Well, the losers really are those people who are going to continue to depend on coral reef fisheries resources for food security and livelihoods. Aquaculture is something that's really yet to take off in the region, and ironically it's a region that's surrounded by the ocean, but most of the future prospects for aquaculture will be in fresh water, particularly small pond aquaculture, and really we're looking at an upside, if you like. That's a winner, because with more water and higher temperatures the productivity of pond aquaculture should increase. In the long term, it's more than likely that those people who want to come to Pacific Island countries and territories to look at lovely, pristine coral reefs are going to be disappointed. Under the A2 emissions scenario, by the end of the century, it's estimated that the coral cover that we have today will decrease by 90%. Well, it's obviously great to have it produced, but really the work lies ahead of us. We don't just want the information to stay between hard covers. We want to get it out there and work with the countries so that we can work through with them what are for them the priority adaptations. Prior to this analysis, there was very little known about how the tropical Pacific Ocean was going to respond to climate change. Well, we believe it's very important for the region because fish plays such an important role in the economies and for communities, particularly for food security and for livelihoods.
Coming from Samoa, it's a small island country, and we have a huge dependence on coastal fisheries. And with climate change, getting the water being much warmer, and so there's a impact on our livelihood and what we depend on. Since our coastal fisheries will be highly impacted by the change in temperature in seawater, the scientists can maybe advise us to look into other alternatives for coastal fisheries. Most Pacific Island countries will consider these information because it's very vital, because we depend on our coastal fisheries, our aquaculture, and it's very vulnerable to this climate change issue. Like I mentioned, we'll start developing on the tuna fisheries or look into aquaculture.
The major question that faces decision makers is how are we going to feed twice the population with less fish? Well, it's setting a new milestone for the region. It is the first book that comprehensively documents the impact of climate change on Pacific fisheries. The major question that faces decision makers is how are we going to feed twice the population with less fish?
Climate change presents a very big challenge for the region, and one of the big issues is trying to work out over the coming years what impact climate change will actually have on the different systems to which the Pacific Island nations depend. And in particular, food security is one of the largest areas of susceptibility to climate change. Some areas, for example, coastal fisheries, are generally going to be adversely affected, but there's also some potential positive spin-offs in terms of where increases in the tuna stock and movements in that. So some countries might have increased catches, some countries decreased catches, so it's incredibly important that they understand what the likely outcomes will be in the future. We have a reasonably good idea where climate change is heading and what some of the potential impacts would be. There's two things. One, those impacts have yet to occur, and so they may or may not eventuate, but the likelihood is they probably will to the extent that we predict. The second thing is that there are opportunities for reducing the risk and vulnerability that they face by changing fish management regimes, protecting coral reefs, looking at how to substitute a greater proportion of tuna into Pacific diets to substitute for fall-off in coastal fisheries, better reef management, better understanding of the migration of species, looking at the impact of aquaculture can play, or freshwater fisheries. So there's a whole mix of potential adaptation options that are available that can substantially reduce the risks and costs. Well, indeed, I mean, sea level rise for the low-lying atoll countries and for the low-lying regions of the larger islands is a serious issue, and it's something that really, if you lose the land, you cannot adapt to that. I guess it's a factor of meeting short to medium term food security and income requirements versus long term implications of potential transmigration or adapting to the sort of effects of inundation. So it's a complex issue and politically very touchy issue, but it's also one where there needs to be some idea of the time frames involved.